And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The naked city, the city of, well, a few 100,000 stories. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Well, we all got kind of a little bit of a surprise this morning. Some of us more so than others. There are days where I feel like it's governmental whack-a-mole. You just never are quite sure what bomb is going to be dropped on you next. And of course, the government has got the advantage of surprise because they can literally rock your world with a well-coordinated, heretofore private attack on, well, whatever they're doing. And in this case, well, it's the RIPTR, as we say in Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. Long has been the case that Kennedy Plaza, a meeting place, a place of coming together for Rhode Islanders of literally every possible background, every possible ethnicity, every possible economic group, has been a source of contention. And largely that has a lot to do with the folks who, quite frankly, surround said Kennedy Plaza. Unfortunately, there are those folks who feel like they're sort of the lords of the city, that there's a level of ownership on what you and I would expect to be common grounds, common areas, property of the city, because of either their connections, their history, their wealth, or their self-appointed self-ownership of the city. So what happens when the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority all of a sudden becomes a political football? Not just in my personal opinion, and I will not project any of my views onto my guest, but in my opinion, not just a very poorly run governmental agency, but becomes the poster child for economic divisiveness. The war on the working poor here in Rhode Island that is ongoing. The sort of economic racism that routinely takes place here in Rhode Island, whether it be the placement of a private prison, whether it be the placement of a casino, or, in this case, whether it be perverting, if you will, the real goals of public transportation for the goals of a few. In the past, we've had folks on from what they call the RIPTR Riders. And that organization has renamed itself, and I'm going to try and get it right, but I want to first introduce my guest, Amy Joy Glidden. Amy is joining us from, now you guys now call yourself the RI Riders?
The Rhode Island Transit Riders, so RI Transit Riders.
RI Transit Riders, excellent. But the mission is still largely the same, and I'm going to let her define that. But ultimately, looking to protect the interests of folks who use mass transportation against the backdrop of a larger community that benefits when mass transportation is used properly. So joining me for the first time is Amy Joy Glidden. Amy, welcome to the Coalition.
Thank you, Pat. Happy to be on.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about the organization, your role as an activist, and how you came to be involved in mass transportation.
Yeah, so Rhode Island Transit Riders has been around since about 2010, 2011. We've always had a core group of members, fewer than 10, that have worked really hard to put on rallies at the State House, protests at the plaza whenever there are fare hikes, when they took away the no-fare bus pass for seniors and disabled. We were one of the groups that helped get that back. We testify in favor of, funding for RIPTA, but one of the reasons we changed our name is we want to be clear, we're very independent from RIPTA. And especially today with some of the, the ways they're just kowtowing to Paolino here, we just want to make that real clear. I personally became involved with RIPTA Riders Alliance because I have been a bus rider for the past, I would say 18 years or so. I actually haven't driven a car. And I just really want to do my part to not use fossil fuels and, preserve the earth in my own small way. And so transportation activism is part of that. But it's also about protecting the needs of the people who use the bus. And people often think, it's just poor people that ride the bus, but a lot of people commute. People from all backgrounds use the bus, all economic classes. And it's really just all about making sure people have a place to go. They can get to their jobs, they can get to hospitals, to, homeless shelters, to food pantries, to wherever they need to go at a fair price and in a way that's convenient for them and with amenities at the places where they're departing from. It's really what it's all about.
Before we get into Kennedy Plaza, from your perspective as an activist and also a customer, and that's what I've always enjoyed about your organization, it's easy sometimes to speak from afar, make prognostications and judgments on behalf of other people, but everyone in your organization actively uses RIPTA as one of their, if not their primary go-to on how they get around in the world, how they travel about Rhode Island. So I've always admired that. What is the state of RIPTA today, in your estimation?
Yeah, well, I think RIPTA has definitely been affected by ride sharing to a certain extent. I think there were a lot of missed opportunities as far as really marketing the Echo Pass to businesses. Rhode Island College just got on there, so their students can ride for free. That should have been done decades ago. RIPTA is really not doing enough to attract new ridership. I think that we need to think of public transit as not just something that is only for a certain group of people, but it's something that really benefits everyone. It makes the road less congested, and it brings people together. Mm-hmm. And I think that really, I enjoy riding the bus and seeing people every day, and Paolino doesn't see that.
Right.
But the state of RIPTA, I think it's, they really could be doing more to promote ridership. That's my opinion.
Right. Here's my frustration. It's interesting because you mentioned rideshare. For folks who do know, my third job after my full-time job and this is I do rideshare a couple nights a week. And my frustration with RIPTA is that there are significant routes which routinely take folks who I count among, and I say this politely, I do not mean to denigrate or marginalize their work, but people who I would consider in the middle class and the working poor to difficult, challenging jobs for which clearly they are not compensated enough. And I'm talking about extensively home healthcare workers in nursing homes and facilities, folks who just do incredible things on a daily basis, exhausting work, and because of RIPTA's lack of coverage, are forced to spend exorbitant amounts of money relative to their pay scale to simply get back and forth to work, while the state spends a fair amount of money subsidizing, in my estimation, a number of routes which service, quite frankly, almost exclusively the middle to upper middle class, or quite frankly, the financial set in downtown Providence. Do one of the challenges has been the fare structure. And I'm not expert on this, but if you're going from Providence down to Quonset, is the fare materially different than if you're going from downtown to Manton Avenue?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and people have talked about should it cost more to go greater distances. And the simple answer to that is that 85% of trips begin or end in the Providence area. So the amount of money that they would make by charging more for trips that go farther, it would really just kind of be unfair to that small minority of people when most people are paying the $2. It wouldn't necessarily be a good return on an investment to charge a fare when the vast majority of trips take place in the Providence area.
Okay. So I woke up this morning listening to WPRO, as I often do early in the morning, to news that, well, we were about to reinvent Kennedy Plaza once again. Now, you folks are intimately involved in mass transportation. When did you find out about this?
Yes. So I actually found out about this last night, I think. And yeah, it seems that there was a very early morning meeting, a secretive meeting of public officials and, private interests that met to be coming up with what I saw quoted in one media release as someone from the plan said, "We don't know if it's feasible." So I don't know about you, but I don't think we should spend $35 million on something without knowing whether or not it's even possible. We're thinking about, that's what happened with 38 Studios, right?
Right. We just ready, shoot, aim.
Yeah.
As I like to say when, we're talking about digging a tunnel underneath the financial district here in Providence, where thousands of people are employed, given let's just say the history of all things transportation in Rhode Island, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I think about that too. There's so many small businesses alongside Washington Street, a lot of little restaurants, a little corner store. You really have private interest interfering with free enterprise right there.
Right. But what in your mind is the motivating factor? Well, let's take a step back. Explain from your interpretation, from what you've seen, what exactly is about to take place here. What is it that the government of Rhode Island, Joe Paolino, the government of, what did I call it, Paolinoville? What is it that the government of Paolinoville is proposing to do here?
Yeah, so, I think one thing that, the tunnel doesn't really make sense to me. I don't really think it makes sense to anyone. In any of the news that I've seen about the tunnel, no one has said why it is necessary. If it's just to keep the buses out of sight, surely they could be rerouted. I don't see why we need a tunnel. And with the sea level rise, a tunnel is very impractical. It's just going to get flooded sooner rather than later. Same with Paolino's idea to do an underground parking lot. That's just going to get flooded. This is just pie in the sky. I think it's just, when you have so much money you don't know what to do with, you get these crazy ideas.
So,
but what is actually happening is that the bus riders of Kennedy Plaza have been slowly displaced, and they're being moved from the plaza to make way for business interests.
Explain.
Paolino would like nothing better than to sweep up what he considers, undesirables from the area. And he owns many buildings around there.
Right. There was an activist in downtown, Mama Dreads, who used to talk about the attacks on the visibly poor. And here was a woman who, by and large, on her own volition, simply brought food that she'd made, gotten donated, wrangled up somehow, and literally just fed the poor. And yet she saw firsthand what that attack did on a daily basis. The proximity to services that folks who are poor need, the transportation of which, those needs aren't going to go away, are they?
Yeah, and one thing that I'd really, I think you make an important point there about when you say access to services. So, a lot of people, possibly the majority of people that are homeless, live in Providence. And when the snow starts and the winter shelters open, it's not like they can go to a winter shelter in Providence. Those winter shelters are spread all across the state,
Right.
you know? And so once these new bus hubs are built, how are they going to get to those shelters? I mean, we're talking about people sleeping on the streets because, you know, they can't get to the bus to get to the shelter, you know?
Right. And some of the most inhospitable weather, well, just about anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
cold, wet, dismal weather. It just seems like we're piling on these people at a certain point. You know, we're
It really,
go ahead, I'm
it
sorry.
really is piling on.
And yet the primary purpose of having Kennedy Plaza be a facility for bus transportation, I mean, aren't ultimately a significant part of the bus ridership working, in fact, right in this immediate area? Where else would you expect them to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. 20% of Providence residents don't own a car. So those are the people that are working in Providence, riding the bus, contributing to the economy of Providence, you know, spending their money there.
Right.
One thing that I'd like to point out is that Peter Aviti said that, you know, from RIDOT, that fares will not go up as a result of this. And he may be technically right about that, but he's being very, very sneaky, and I'll tell you why. So right now, if someone leaves their house and they have 2 buses to get to work, they take the bus to Kennedy Plaza, and then they take another bus from Kennedy Plaza to get to work. Now, in the future, they want to have more hubs. So let's say she has to go, you know, from one hub to another hub. That's another fare.
Oh, ouch. Yeah, I mean that certainly doesn't work. And these are people. I want to go back in time. You alluded to a series of events that took place just a handful of years ago. Some of these folks are so marginalized. They live, as it were, in food deserts, that when the free ride program was shut down, effectively sunsetted, that I got quotes from folks who ran 2 area shelters that saw almost an overnight collapse, if you will, in these people's health. So if you're trying to get to the Pawtucket Kitchen, which is one of the well-run, privately run soup kitchens, and these folks do the work of the Lord there, literally, that folks' inability to get mass transportation to that. These folks live to such a high degree on the edge that the impact on them was almost instant. That within weeks, one longtime shelter manager pointed out to me, within a handful of weeks, you saw people actually start to display signs of malnutrition. That's how important access is. So, and that's how razor thin the line is for so many of these folks who are either in the working or the visibly poor. I mean, am I exaggerating things? I don't think I am.
No, Pat. I mean, it really breaks, you know, my heart. And the thing is that we're going to see some of the same effects with this because people are not going to be able to afford the extra fare to go to a hub. You know, people have very, very tight connections, just a few minutes. If they have to go to another hub to get to work, we're talking about someone losing their job, you know? This could even drive the unemployment rate up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, folks who are served by mass transportation very often, and let's think about some of the bus rides in Rhode Island. They're long, they're circuitous. That's part of life when you take mass transportation, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
you're not talking about people who, in many cases, who, if they had the opportunity to buy a car in today's society, if they had the wherewithal to buy a car, wouldn't add, in some cases, hours to their day in terms of productivity, simply rest when it comes down to it. Well, after coming from challenging jobs, and again, I'm talking about people who work in home health care, who are frontline healthcare providers, if they could afford to do so. What makes it even more dramatic is that Rhode Island is one of the most expensive places in the nation to afford a vehicle. So what you've got here is a perfect storm. You've got, I don't believe you have adequate mass transportation in the state. Frankly, my solution might be a little different as a libertarian. I would love to open it up to private competition because, quite frankly, I'll always believe that market-driven private competition will do a better job than unaccountable government monopolies, but that's my personal view. But quite frankly, we need lower prices of car ownership, and if we can't do that, and that still renders it unaffordable for people, we need to make transportation to work simply more accessible.
Definitely. Absolutely. And we can't think about making things better when politicians and private interests conspire to make these, it's just a crazy quilt plan, It's not really comprehensible. It doesn't make sense. And another thing that I was thinking of when we're talking about these vulnerable people that are being impacted, what about all of those Providence students who use the bus to get to their high school?
Right.
Kids are going to be affected by this.
And we need to understand that a significant source of revenue for this town is the college student population. And
Absolutely.
As someone who had a daughter who went to college for 4 years here in Providence and lived in Providence while she was doing so, RIPTA was a lifeline. We certainly couldn't come in all the time and drive her around. And that was kind of not the point. Here was a college student who worked her entire 4-year term at a local university doing hard work, bakery work, grunt work, the type of stuff that's soul building, right? But and to her eternal credit, she took the bus and she learned how to live in a city. But not all of these folks are the children of rich European royalty. A lot of these kids are essentially working poor because of the high cost of college. So we need to be looking at things to make Providence more attractive to folks like that who, as a community, bring enormous amounts of money into the city, spend it extensively on local businesses, local restaurants, shopping. We need to make it easier for them to get to the Providence Place Mall and to any one of a number of strip malls or places like that, instead of making it more difficult. And the one common denominator, once again, is that Kennedy Plaza is within walking distance of virtually, with the exception of PC, almost the entire Providence University community. Jay Wu,
Absolutely.
RISD, Brown, and do we want those kids bringing cars onto campus anyway because of the congestion around Thayer Street and on College Hill anyway? No.
Yeah. This is a backwards plan. I mean, it's going to increase congestion. It's going to increase our use of fossil fuel. It's going to make life difficult, even hazardous for vulnerable people. School attendance is probably going to go down. What kid wants to have an extra leg on their journey to school? Mm-hmm. Some kids are already taking multiple buses to school. I've heard of kids that have to take 2 buses because they have to drop their younger sibling off before they go to school.
Because they're both of their parents, or if they're in a single-parent household, the parent is often working at nights or it has to leave for work before these children can go to school.
Yeah. And so they're really doing the best they can, but, how can you expect a child to cope with a big change like figuring out, which one of the 3 bus hubs do I have to go to, and how am I going to get my younger sister to her school?
Right.
what if my bus hub is not the same bus hub that she needs to go to?
Right. I have to ask, do you think Mr. Paolino would take a month off of being driven into town and maybe actually just take the bus to town before he makes these kind of, or am I just being silly?
Yeah, I mean, I just, maybe he would for, a photo op.
Right.
But, the funny thing is, when I thought about this situation, I thought it's a real the emperor has no clothes type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we have a guy who really thinks he's an emperor,
Well, that's why.
who thinks that he's above the law.
Right, and that's why I now christen officially, for purposes of our little show here, this neighborhood to be Paolinoville, which is, yes, it is a takeoff on a certain 1940s epic Christmas movie, Potterville. And no, it's not it's not a compliment. It's not a compliment.
Compliment of your movie choice, I think.
Yeah. Randall Rose was on WPRO this morning, and he did a wonderful job, as Randall often does. And again, Randall and I may be on different sides of the political spectrum on many issues, but I've always had tremendous respect for his work ethic. Randall shows up for everything. Randall is in there tooth and nail, testifying, working on the beast known as legislation here in this state. And to his eternal credit, Randall was all over this morning. He pointed out that the $35 million bond issue, which is going to be perverted, my words, to pay for this, essentially we've turned that into corporate welfare, haven't we?
We really have. And, let's go back to that $35 million, because it actually said in the bond that the bus hubs were to be built throughout the state of Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Now they want to use it all for Providence. So the voters were lied to.
Yep.
And the reason I say they were lied to is because, the Providence Chamber of Commerce was one of the supporters of this bill, Mm-hmm. So was their plan really from the beginning to just use this money to destroy Kennedy Plaza?
Yeah. Now, there are problems in Kennedy Plaza. I mean, there are more than anecdotal tales of drug use, there was particularly 2 years ago, a very difficult summer where folks felt like they were being accosted. There are other alternative solutions to that problem, aren't there? I mean, we don't have to rip up the downtown and upset the entire state in order to make one man's real estate ventures more prosperous. I mean, what would be your suggestion to get a little bit more control over Kennedy Plaza?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it really starts with providing people with the services they need to live healthy and fulfilling lives. We need jobs programs, we need drug treatment, we need housing for homeless people. I believe in housing first. That's a model that's worked very well in many communities. And, I was talking to a friend the other day, and she said that they did a study to see places that are coming closer to solving the homelessness crisis. What have they done right? And in each case, they had a homelessness czar, someone in government who's in charge of this, because otherwise no one wants to touch this issue. Right. And I think that's kind of the real problem, is that no one wants to provide homeless people with homes. We could do that for a lot less than $35 million.
Right.
We could house every homeless person in Rhode Island.
Again, I look at this from a free market perspective, and when I look at the sheer volume of tax breaks that are leveraged by a distinct subset of developers who routinely build middle to actually upper income housing in a town that I firmly believe does not need any more expensive housing. Mm-hmm. we've turned the system upside down. If folks if those developers want to build expensive housing, they certainly have a right to. What they don't have a right to is to ignore their tax obligations and foist those tax obligations on a ever smaller industrial and retail base, so that they can use the market to pervert the need for these buildings. If the market were allowed to operate in a truly free market without subsidies, then clearly the demand for affordable housing would create market demand to build affordable housing that was geared towards certain income brackets. Now, that housing is not going to be as luxurious. It isn't going to have cable jacks in every room. It isn't going to have built-in Wi-Fi, and it probably won't have a jacuzzi. But it'll be safe, clean, affordable housing that folks will be able to afford, and quite frankly, they'd still have the opportunity to profit from. But
yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you in the sense that I'm definitely against all these tax subsidies. You know, the Fane Tower, that monstrosity.
Right.
A good example of something that should not be allowed. And yet another example of something that the city doesn't really need. Like, we don't really need more luxury housing.
Right. If they build, from my perspective, if they build it on their own dime, then who am I to say what they are to do? That's their personal investment. But again, we continue in this town to socialize risk and privatize reward by allowing people to use tax breaks to artificially gear the market towards the construction or the renovation or the repurposing of existing housing stock to expensive housing. And then we're shocked when, as the West End begins to gentrify a little bit, that folks who are in the community, who have been in the community for generations, can no longer afford to live. I mean, ultimately, who is the community for? The people who've lived there for generations and who built it, or a bunch of carpetbaggers and interlopers in the form of real estate developers who would use the tax money generated by the working poor literally against themselves. They're weaponizing the tax system against the very people, the few people in this town who are actually paying it. It's outrageous.
It's really sickening. And, you know, another thing that I was thinking about is that, you know, all these places that are really nice, these luxury condominiums but what amenities might these new bus huts have? Say the one by Victory Plating. Is it going to have places to buy tickets, an indoor waiting area, bathrooms? I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. You know, we'll force people outside into difficult weather. Ultimately, you'll see less and less people use mass transportation, and the system ultimately, at some point, will have to collapse amongst itself. It becomes a matter of math after a while. And the highly compensated executive director of RIPTA, who left the city of Warwick in the middle of the night, the problems Warwick is facing right now financially are beyond epic. They're catastrophic. Warwick, in its own way, may make it to the bankruptcy finish line before Providence does, incredibly enough, given the sheer weight of the pension obligations that the mayor saddled this city with for generations. I wonder why we, the late great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci used to talk about it, how no one went out and did what he called an intergalactic search for talent. How is it that we ended up with a DOT director and a RIPTA director with little or no experience at that level in those kind of organizations? I'm not shocked, but it continues to amaze me.
Well, you know what they say, if there's no special interest, there's no interest, right?
Right. We couldn't get anybody else to run RIPTA. And these are my comments, not yours. I know you folks are, work hard at developing a working relationship with RIPTA and representing riders. You are independent of RIPTA. I want to make that very clear. But you work with them. I don't have to. I can just, I can just be my usual sarcastic self. After an intergalactic search, we somehow conveniently found that the mayor of Warwick turned out to be the very best person to run a mass transportation facility, an industry of which he has no experience whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to comment too much on it beyond saying that,
Yeah, and I
you
don't
know,
want you.
our organization, we recommend people to the RIPTA board that are riders.
Mm-hmm.
And our organization actually put through a bill that states that the RIPTA board is supposed to have a disabled rider and someone who rides the buses. And so the RIPTA board interpreted that to mean that they could have, you know, a disabled rider who rides, you know, the buses and just kind of have sort of like a 2-in-1, and just shows that they're just treating someone like that like a token, you know?
Right.
It's not fair representation.
Right. And the need for fair representation exists because, quite frankly, this isn't their private money they're wheeling and dealing with. This is the people's money. And the people are entitled to representation, particularly if they represent stakeholders in the community for which, you know, their very business enterprise relies on. They don't get to do what they want, when they want, how they want. And that's a notion, I believe, that has to be disabused of folks at high level in Rhode Island government. They are not self-appointed warlords. They are not the owners of this. They are simply stewards who are supposed to be acting in the best interest of the community, leveraging a serious effort on behalf of the ridership community. But, you know, again, all of this is political. None of it is really geared towards, you know, looking at the common, you know, the common good. I mean, I hearken back to the Route 610 development. You know, effectively, in the rush to fulfill her obligations to labor unions in the state, and I'm a union guy, all right, the governor of Rhode Island decided not to take the necessary time to re-envision and probably renew and reanalyze the needs of the driving community. Essentially, what we're doing at 610 is a replacement of the same soul-searing, city-dividing, you know, blast zone-like dagger across the urban core of the state highway building that was emblematic of the 50s. So here's the tragedy from my perspective. I love your feeling on this. We have had significant opportunities in the last 5 or 6 years to look towards our transportation grid, to look towards our infrastructure, and try and re-envision how cities can grow as a result of repurposed transportation. And in my opinion, we have looked at historic opportunities, blinked, ignored them, and instead reinvested untold wealth into perpetuating the status quo, which will not work in a 21st and 22nd century environment. I think we've missed the boat completely. A huge opportunity lost in trying to envision a state that really embraces the new and modern. But that's my opinion. What are your thoughts on this? What do we need to do as someone who represents the ridership community to make things better?
Well, I think that it would really start with promoting ridership. You know, all colleges and universities in Rhode Island should have their students ride for free. The universities pay for that. And it's a good service for their students. It's a good value. I think when I went to Rhode Island College and when this was discussed, they said, you know, a $50 per semester charge for all the students to be able to ride free. Mm-hmm. And when you think a monthly pass is $70, you're really saving hundreds of dollars a year.
Right.
For that. So I think it's a good value. Rhode Island has this thing called the Eco Pass that employers can use, and it's really underutilized. Uh-huh. I also think, you know, RIPTA can be doing more to make Kennedy Plaza a more inviting place for riders, you know, more lights at night. Have the terminal be open later. You know, South Station, it's open 24 hours.
Right.
Why do we shut down the terminal at 7 o'clock?
It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
I mean,
basic things, maybe like changing tables in the bathrooms for parents. a little cafe that people can go to it in the building. There used to be one.
Should the city?
You know, when we make it a destination that people want to go to, it will increase the quality of life.
And commensurately, it will increase their bottom line. You know?
Exactly.
I mean, there's no question that, with the exception of a handful of routes, that the significant routes are underutilized. Even a slight bump in ridership will accrue significantly to the bottom line of RIPTA, and get put in a better place to invest in its rolling stock and its facilities. It strikes me that RIPTA needs someone, not just who's a political placeholder, but someone who is actually going to go out and champion mass transportation in the state. If not, we should, as a state, get the hell out of it and allow private enterprise, which will do a better job, guarantee you, and will find ways to service marginalized communities because there's the opportunity to increase their business. Then we need to do something like that. It's just simply not working on so many different levels. It's frustrating. It's costing people opportunities. It's devaluing the quality of their life because of the extreme amount of time they have to spend on it. How important is it in your mind to increase security at Kennedy Plaza?
Well, I want to be careful about that because I think that when we increase security, say with cameras, you're increasing surveillance on people. You know, and I'm not a fan of the security state, right? So I think we have to be careful about that. You know, cameras on buses, I think it has to be very carefully controlled, like who has access to them. But, you know, I have to say for myself, Pat, honestly, I feel very safe at Kennedy Plaza. You know, I'll often go out at night to a show and take the bus home. It's fairly safe. I think it's better since they have had security. But I think it's important that people not be criminalized for things like smoking cigarettes or, you know, that just seems kind of ridiculous to me. People can do what they want with their bodies, right?
You better be careful. You're sounding awfully libertarian in a lot of this conversation. Well, and that speaks to the larger point here. You know, the narrative that's being employed by Joe Paolino is that Kennedy Plaza is filthy, it's unkempt, and it's unsafe. And I have to tell you, as someone who is in the city very often, very late at night, as a rideshare driver, I go to all neighborhoods. And I actually get the biggest kick out of doing it because I meet every type of person imaginable, engaged in every type of active commerce imaginable. And I'm saying, you know, that's saying something here in Rhode Island because we have a diverse economic community. I've done over 3,000 Lyft rides. 3,000.
Wow.
All right. So I've met a lot of people and had some great, very insightful conversations about their attitudes towards the city government. And I'm infuriated that these folks would try to sully the reputation of the visibly poor in order to achieve a level of economic gain. That to me is infuriating. And and if I were to, you guys do wonderful work in your group. You know, I've had folks from your group here throughout the history of this show. If I were to ask you one thing, it would be to visibly stand up for the reputation and of the folks, the inhabitants of Kennedy Plaza in general. Because in any neighborhood, you're going to have a few bad apples. But the notion that this group of people, who for reasons out of their control have to spend a great deal of time in Kennedy Plaza, are somehow worth less or their behavior can be impeached or used or conflated for the gain of the investment quality of Mr. Paluna's property, I think is disgusting. And he needs to stop.
I agree with you. I mean, basically, the quality of life for bus riders will decrease, and the quality of life for wealthy business owners will increase.
Yeah. You know, and how listen, I mean, let's be blunt. It's a number of folks today, particularly on WPRO, pointed out towards businesses leaving Kennedy Square, Kennedy Plaza. I still call it Kennedy Square, Kennedy Plaza. All right. And they would conflate that with the folks hanging out in Kennedy Plaza during the day. And to that, I say largely balderdash, because quite frankly, I think it has a lot more to do with the overall cost of doing business in Rhode Island than it does anything to do with the people who are here.
Yeah, and I mean, I think too, we're not the only city that struggles with this. You know, I mean, in San Francisco, there are a lot of homeless people. In Boston, there are a lot of homeless people. In you know, New York City, there are a lot of homeless people. And in all these places, you see efforts to keep people out. I mean, you know, the benches at Kennedy Plaza are pretty much designed so they're uncomfortable to sleep on, you know?
Right.
But I think we really need to just get at some of these root issues. You know, it's just like, you know, they want to put us underground. They want to put us out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
No one wants to actually solve the problems that people have. They just don't want to see them.
Right. If they're confronted by these issues firsthand on a daily basis, there's a chance that these folks become human to them. What better way to dehumanize folks, to misclassify folks, to ignore folks, than to simply sweep them literally under a province's carpet? If they go away, then there is no problem. If they cease to exist in one's mind's eye, then they're out of sight, out of mind. So everything must be great. And, you know, I often hear certain journalists and news people say, well, you know, we've got so much to be thankful in Rhode Island. You know, a night out, a dinner on Federal Hill, going down to South County to hang out at Narragansett Beach and, you know, maybe catch a play at PPAC. What about the people for whom that list of activities is simply a pipe dream? And it's largely a pipe dream because of the incredible cost of government in this state and the incredible failure of government in this state to create an environment in which businesses can prosper. So if you're in that percentage of people for whom life is just great, listen, I don't begrudge you that at all. But that doesn't mean you have a license then to simply ignore the challenges that the working poor in this state face and the people who are the visibly poor. You just don't have that. You don't get a free get out of jail pass from feeling a little bit of guilt and being challenged by the fact that we are living amongst people who have far less than us, and we should be doing something. And we could disagree what that is. We might. But we should be working aggressively to create an environment here in Rhode Island where folks of all types can prosper and live lives of wonder and self-determination. And it doesn't seem, like you say, that there's a lot of interest in doing that. It's much easier just to make them go away. And that's
Yeah.
it. So.
I mean, it definitely makes me think personally of Matthew 25. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yep. But let us know. Tell us.
Is it? I don't know if it's Matthew 25, but the parable where Jesus is talking to the people and he says, you know, you saw me and you didn't give me something to drink. I was hungry. You didn't feed me. I needed a place to stay. You left me out, you know, and now you'll depart from me, you know?
Right.
Like, that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So, Mr. Paolino can have, and again, these are my words, not yours, he can have his pretty little plaza with happy white people going to their executive jobs at fill-in-the-bank bankster, and he can reflect and beat his chest and say, look at what I have done. Until one day he'll realize exactly well, what he's done. And perhaps that revelation needs to take place sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you'll keep us in the loop. I think you know where I stand on this issue now. I'm gonna take no prisoner on this. As far as I'm concerned, I want to go out tomorrow and put out some benches in honor of Mama Dreads and some of the other volunteers. Let's serve up. Let's bring people down. Let's bring the whole community down to Kennedy Plaza. Have a little party. That's what I think needs to happen. Bring people from Oneyville. Bring people from Manton Ave. Bring people from down on the Eddy Street in the hospital district. Bring people out to downtown Providence and let them enjoy, the crisp autumn air, and perhaps a little bit of Mr. Paolino's unintended hospitality. Maybe that's what needs to happen to remind people that these are folks just like the rest of us, and we should not be marginalizing them, and we certainly should not be using taxpayer money to make them go away in ways that were never intended by the people who are paying that tax bill for those bonds and by the people who voted to support them. Thank you again for your activism. Say hi to Randall for me when you see him, and Don Rhodes and all those folks at, give me the right name of the organization again, because I'm going to stumble over this a half a dozen times.
Yes. Rhode Island Transit Riders, or RY Transit Riders. Yep.
Right. And where can they find you folks on the web?
So you can find us on Facebook, RY Transit Riders, and join our Facebook group. And can I say where we meet?
Absolutely. Please.
Yeah, so we meet the first Monday of every month at the Providence Foundation, which is right near Kennedy Plaza, at 4 o'clock.
Ironic, isn't it? And why do you meet there? Because it's the center of everything. Listen, Amy Joy Glidden, she's joining us from I've already messed it up, from the RI Transit Riders, and they feel very strongly that, and if I can be so bold as to sum up your attitude on this, they feel very strongly that the $35 million bond issue that was passed and paid for by Rhode Island voters did not intend to essentially submerge, to place out of mind, out of sight, and quite frankly, out of heart, that which is Kennedy Plaza, the transportation hub really for the entire state of Rhode Island. It was not meant to marginalize folks of lesser means. That bill was not meant to take transportation and make it more onerous and more complicated for folks in our school systems, for young people in our colleges. It was not meant for any of that. That money is supposed to be spent to help modernize a challenged system that needs all the help it can get. It does not need to be spent to be it's not at the beck and call, if you will, of a handful of property developers who made their own independent decision to invest in property surrounding Kennedy Plaza and took the risk therefrom. It was not meant to subsidize, if you will, or I should say privatize the success and socialize risk on their behalf. It wasn't meant for any of that. And I think it's at moments like this where we need to take a moment and remind them. So Amy Joy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right.
Good night.
Good night, buddy. We're going to take a very quick break right now. We're going to try and get our good friend Amy on the phone. She's deep in the woods of Rhode Island, so I'm not sure how good the connection will be. But we're going to try her on the phone. You are listening to the Coalition, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. You know, it's so important that you take the time out, if you could be so good as to follow us on social media. Social media is an avenue for indie media to broadcast their efforts, to spread the word, as it were, to try somehow to swim amongst the noise that is the greater social media world, to try and get their voices heard in an area where it's just filled up often with NFL draft choice videos, makeup videos, tchotchke videos. We appreciate the people who have taken the time to like us, follow us, and also listen to our podcast, which is now on Spreaker, which can be linked directly from the coalitionradio.us website, as well as a variety of other podcast choices. Still working on getting on Apple. We'll be there soon. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.